going to have Leonor introduce us.
Okay, I'm really happy to be here today representing Palo Alto Humane Society. We're a very old organization on the Mid-Peninsula, which encompasses everywhere from San Carlos all the way down through Sunnyvale and even a little farther south. We've been around for 110 years, and during that time, I wasn't there, and I don't know anyone else who was. During that time, we've done a lot of different things. When we started out, we were a small group, and we helped local animals, stray dogs, horses who were being overworked, and we eventually built a shelter and ran the shelter until 1970. And like to say I was around in 1970, little kid, but not here. And we, the city of Palo Alto took over the shelter, and nominally they are still in charge of the shelter. It's being run today by Pets in Need. The municipal shelter is located on East Bay Shore, near where Ming's used to be. So what did we do if we're still around since 1970? We were always engaged in education. We presented to schools before 1970 and after 1970. We also educate people of all ages. So we visited senior centers, students of all ages. We've worked with university students who've helped us, with volunteers, even from out of the country who are visiting for the summer, who help us in our educational efforts. We've also always continued to support animals through veterinary care programs, which are the Animal Rescue Fund, helping strays in the street, usually cats, but we also help dogs and other animals who are stray. Our Spay Neuter Fund, where we try to spay and neuter as many animals as possible so that there isn't an overpopulation, so we can help every animal locally to find a home, that they're not lost in a shelter system. So our goal is to try to keep animals out of the shelter. And when they're in the shelter, we advocate for them as well. When animals are in homes and people suffer financial difficulties or are laid off or are subsisting on Social Security and very little else, we intervene with grants to help people take care of their animals and be able to still keep them at home. Our education program is very diverse. This is just one kind of program we're offering, and we're kind of limited to Zoom at this point. But when we're not doing Zoom, when things were very different, we would visit classrooms with animals and their people and learn all about animals and different kinds of programs. We partner with Silicon Valley Animal Control Authority, which is the local shelter for Mountain View and a few other towns. And we have a Reading to Cats program called Kitties to Kitties. Younger kids tend to want to read to cats, and reading to cats makes them feel, oh, someone's talking to me and I'm getting used to their voice and I can come over and sit on their lap, and then it turns into something else. And we teach kids how to socialize cats, how best to treat cats to make them feel more comfortable and safer with different people and become even more adoptable. We work with cats of all ages through that program, and older students work with us in different ways in that program by socializing cats. They also do projects for us, and you're older kids and you work with us by attending our sessions. And we offer for middle school and high school students, we offer community service hours. So that's in short what we do. We have Julie Forbes here with her wonderful, wonderful greyhound Kermit. And this was a serendipitous, like by chance meeting. we had our office in Coverly, and Julie taught in Coverly. And one day I walked out and there was Kermit. And I said, wow, you guys, and I ran back into the office, you guys got to see this dog. So that's how we met Julie and Kermit. So I'm very happy that they're here today to talk to us about a bunch of stuff, rescuing dogs, how dogs help us feel good, what therapy dogs and service dogs do. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie, unless you have questions for me. Do you have any questions for me? No. Okay. I think everyone wants to meet Kermit because he's such a great guy. Yeah.
Thank you, Leonor. So here's Kermit. Kermit says hi. Hello. You'll see Kermit is very relaxed, and his temperament being relaxed is one of the reasons that he gets so many jobs as a therapy dog. Kermit has a couple of roles, and I'm just basically his person that takes him around. First of all, Kermit is a greyhound, and greyhounds, I don't know if you are aware, greyhounds are not very commonly bred dogs from breeders. Most of the greyhounds in this country come directly from racetracks, and dogs are raced or have been raced a lot like horses have been raced. It's pretty much a game that people bet on the dogs. And in this country, dog racing isn't really the best fate for a dog. They don't get as much care as a pet gets. So fortunately, there are arrangements with the dog tracks that when the dog is either not suitable for racing or it's done with its racing career, that the tracks have made arrangements with rescue groups to turn the dogs over so they can get rehomed into a family. And that's where Kermit came from. He was bred to race at the track in Tucson, Arizona, and that was going to be his career. Although their careers are fairly short, dogs don't race longer than 5 years unless they're breeding. But he got off early. He came to me when he was 2 years old because they decided he didn't have the right temperament to race. You can see he's much happier on a couch. So the first thing he became an advocate for our local greyhound rescue organization, because a lot like other dog breeds or mixed breeds that need to be rescued, they need groups to get visibility out so that they can match the dogs with people that might want to adopt a dog rather than go to a breeder. So Kermit is an advocate for other greyhounds who need homes. And every month we go to different dog stores and set up booths of information and places where people can come pet the greyhounds, learn about their temperament, what they're like as pets, in case anyone would like to adopt a greyhound. And a lot of people don't know about greyhounds and what they're like as pets. So that's what he does. And greyhounds are very calm dogs, even though they're racing dogs. So a lot of people are concerned about rescuing a greyhound, that they'll be hyper, they'll need constant exercise. But what we're there to do is help them learn that greyhounds have a different temperament and they're very easy pets. This is what having a greyhound is like 99% of the time. They're very relaxed, they're very calm, they just want to be with you, and they do need to get walks, and maybe once a week or so they need to go out for play or socialization. But Kermit's there to help educate people on what having a greyhound as a pet might be like, so that his other companions at the racetrack can get adopted. So that's his first job. Kermit is also here to help talk about how animals help others. And we're going to focus most today about how dogs in particular, although lots of animals help people in different ways. And we're going to talk about people, even though dogs can help other animals. I watched a show this morning called, it was a show about animal connections, how dogs make connections with other animals. Sometimes a baby animal who doesn't have a mother, a dog will adopt it and help bring it up. So, but today we're going to focus on how dogs in particular can help people in lots of different ways. So Kermit, he's a therapy dog, but he's not the kind of therapy dog that helps people when they have challenges or difficulties with abilities. So that's another kind of therapy dog that we'll talk about. But Kermit's job, basically, since my job is a psychologist and I work with people to reduce stress and anxiety, Kermit's job is to help people relax. That's really what his job is, and reduce stress. And the first thing that is really important to know is that it isn't just because people like animals in general that they help people relax. There's lots of research, and I think Rachel has shared some of that research with you so that you have some of the data behind it. But we know for a fact through scientific research that animals and dogs amongst them help people physiologically relax, because a lot of our stress and anxiety is physiological and chemical based in our body because we're designed to flee and fight for survival. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that shows that even being near an animal, but even more specifically touching an animal, petting an animal, does some physiological things in your body to help you relax. First of all, we know that it lowers blood pressure. And blood pressure is one of the indicators in your body that gets higher when you're stressed, because when you're stressed and you go into fight or flight for survival, your blood vessels contract to get the blood pumping in your body for that reaction. And petting a dog has been shown to relax the blood vessels and lower the blood pressure, which is a sign of greater health and balance. And also, there are certain chemicals that are secreted in your body when you get stressed, things like adrenaline and cortisol, that take a toll on us when we're anxious and stressed. And it's shown in animals that they secrete other chemicals like oxytocin, which are calming and pleasant chemicals for us. They're bonding chemicals. And so they help us relax and feel better emotionally. So dogs help us physiologically, and they help us emotionally be calm and relaxed and feel good. And so that's primarily what Kermit's job is. In my stress reduction programs, I work with groups of people, usually about 20 to 25 people. And his first job is to go around and say hello, to introduce himself. Lots of people like to say hi to him and give him a pet. Not everybody does. So the fact that Kermit is very relaxed and not so, we say, in your face. He doesn't get right in your face. He gives people the option to say hi. And if they don't want to, he just walks by to the next person. So not everybody wants to get really close to the dog, and he gives them that option. So the first thing he does is he goes and says hello to people, and that alone makes some people calmer physiologically and happier. They're just excited to see him, and they feel a little happier. They're often really stressed having driven in traffic when they get to class. Right, Kermit? Kermit, luckily, even though I might be stressed when I'm there too, Kermit doesn't care about all the traffic. So he doesn't transmit all that anxiety that humans transmit to each other. So that's his first job, is to say hello. And then when he can, he stays in class. And then people during breaks or after class can go hang out with him to take some relaxation time. So Kermit, one of his jobs is to come to class and help people relax and reduce stress. Another job he has is, like Leonor said, he's a volunteer for the Palo Alto Humane Society, along with a lot of other canine friends. And they go to, Kermit's primarily a part of the program where he goes to schools. Leonor has a program where we do a visit, a meet and greet at schools, visit classes, let people pet the dogs. We talk about dog care, animal care. Some of you know that really well because you might have pets yourself, but not everyone has a pet. So some of them are just interested in what it takes to have a pet in your family or care for a pet or how to rescue animals. So we go and do that. And Kermit also has some visits. There's another part of the Humane Society that goes into adult workplaces because you'll see when you get older, it isn't just school that's kind of hard. Adult workplaces can be very difficult at times. People can get stressed out from the time, the limit of time they have to do things or how many people they have to talk to. And so the dogs can go into workplaces to give people a little bit of a break. So Kermit goes into schools. Oh, Leonor has a comment.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, we not only go to workplaces, we go to senior centers where people sometimes are stressed. We also go to universities and high schools at finals time or midterms time when people just want to sit and de-stress and hug a dog. And all our dogs are very huggable and pettable, especially Kermit. Thanks.
Thank you, Leonor. Yes, Kermit actually went to one of the high schools, not in this finals period because we're on video, but last finals period, he got to go to some high schools so that they could take a break and pet the dog to relax in between finals. And Kermit has done many jobs at, I'm going to let him go to his bed. He wants to go to his bed. Go ahead. Go ahead. He prefers to go lie in his bed. So I take a bed with me everywhere so that Kermit can be comfortable on his bed. But Kermit also does go to senior centers where people can be maybe missing having a pet sometimes. And all of you who have pets, you know how important that companionship is of your pet and how much they're part of your family. Some people who live in senior communities aren't allowed to have their pets anymore, and having a pet come in to visit can be really important for them to be able to reconnect to another animal. And Kermit also goes into what we call skilled nursing centers or rehab centers when people come out of hospitals and need a little more care and aren't ready to go home yet. They're in skilled nursing centers, which are residents where they're not in the hospital, but they get some hospital-like care. And Kermit can go in to visit those kind of centers where people are healing, and having an animal visit can really enhance their healing, because when they feel better, they will heal faster. And sometimes they're kind of lonely being out, not in their own home. Sometimes they're scared because they're still healing and getting nursing care. And sometimes they're uncomfortable, and a dog coming in can really help them heal better and feel more comfortable. I'll tell you one story that I shared with Rachel. Sometimes in these rehab centers where people are healing, there are people with Alzheimer's disease where some of their memory is failing. And sometimes when their memory is failing, they get really anxious and they're restless and they're not always sure where they are. So they're really disoriented. And sometimes in that disorientation, they'll pace or they'll start screaming out of disorientation, or they're just really agitated. And I would bring in my dog, Kermit would go in, and as soon as he walked in the door, the patients that were agitated would just settle down and they would get really interested in the dog and they would pet the dog. And even though they had memory problems, sometimes they will remember his name each time he comes. So it really calms down their fear and agitation and discomfort, just having a dog present, which not only helps them, but it helps all the people who are helping care for them in their environment. It calms everybody down. So Kermit does go to rehab centers and skilled nursing centers. And like Leonor mentioned, he does the schools and the workplaces, and he does my classes. So Kermit has a lot of different jobs in addition to creating visibility to rescue other companion greyhounds that need homes. So when you're off video and we're all able to move around freely again, there are several options you have. In addition to your own pets, you can come see what it's like to advocate for a rescue group like Kermit's rescue group, which is called Greyhound Friends for Life. You can see what we do to help raise visibility for rescue. And then the Humane Society has lots of options for involvement for cats and dogs and for fundraising projects, because all these groups kind of are nonprofit and they run on their own fundraising. There are lots of projects to do. So Kermit has these specific jobs, but other dogs, we don't want to let go of the fact that there are lots of other jobs that dogs specifically can do to help people. And even though Kermit isn't trained specifically for these jobs, there are people that have challenges with some of their abilities. And we've learned over the years that dogs can be really helpful partners in helping them have a better quality of life and help with some of those challenges they're having. Many of you probably already know that dogs get trained to help people who are losing their sight or who are blind, and that the dogs are helpful substitutions for their capabilities of sight, and we call those leader dogs. So you're probably aware of them. But dogs also get trained for all sorts of ways of helping people. There are people who have challenges with health, and we've learned that there are seizure diseases called epilepsy, where there's some electrical currents that get interrupted and people have seizures. And dogs have been trained to recognize before a person may have one of these seizures that they're going to have one, and they let the person know that this is going to happen so the person can be safe and even notify someone that they might need help. And so they're indicator dogs that the person might be about to have a seizure. And there are also dogs that have been trained to sense other physiological changes in blood sugar for people who have severe diabetes and have an immune disorder with insulin. Dogs have been trained to notify them that they might have a problem coming. Dogs have been trained to help people who've been traumatized. A lot of times when people come back from being in the military and have been traumatized by their experiences, they have a dog that can help minimize some of the ongoing trauma that they're having to ease their quality of life. And I don't know, Rachel, you might have some other examples. Do you have any other examples of how dogs help people in physiological or aiding them in their quality of life?
Yes, well, the girls were assigned some reading beforehand. Another instance that pops to mind is some cats that can actually seem to maybe smell something different about their pet owner, and notice that there's a problem area on their body and they're fixated on it. And instances where they go into the doctor and realize that there's a precancerous or cancerous growth, that there's something changed about that part of their body that the animal can
Yeah.
detect. Although that's more of a random occurrence, they might notice it and not be able to tell you, but that some animals can actually indicate in a favorable way for the owner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are other challenges. Let's say someone has the inability for whatever, maybe they've gotten injured and they can't use their arms. Dogs have also been trained to help in some of the logistical things like opening refrigerator doors or opening the front door. Dogs can be trained to help people who have limited use of some of their arms or legs, and animals can help in that way as well. And so today we're focusing on how dogs can be helpful to humans, but I just want to add that so many animals, like Rachel just mentioned, cats participate in different ways in helping people, and horses. There are lots of horses that have been trained to help people. So it certainly isn't limited to dogs, but we were really fortunate to be able to have you meet Kermit in a very limited way. I hope you'll be able to meet him in person, because he he does much better in person than he does on video. He's
He is
We all
so
do.
great. People sit down and cuddle with him, and he is in seventh heaven when that happens.
Yeah, it's a little hard for you to get to know Kermit on video, but I'm really interested to hear if you have any questions, either about Kermit and what Kermit and I do, or what Leonor does with the Humane Society, or just maybe you have pets and you want to share some way with us, because we'd like to hear, you know, how does your pet benefit your quality of life, right? Just having a pet as a family member. So we'd be really interested in hearing your questions or even sharing your stories. Anybody?
So feel free to jump in,
Yeah,
just take
Izzy.
yourself off mute if you have a question.
Yeah, Izzy, go ahead.
So I'm just, yeah, okay, so I'm just wondering, with the dogs that, not like Kermit, but that are there to help with people who have different things going on, or with maybe like how Miss Rachel said about the cats who can sense that their owners have like something going on, like a cancer in their chest. How do they know about that? Like and also how do the therapy animals know what to do?
Did you
Well,
want to start, Rachel?
Well, speaking to the medical side of things, I think in my reading what they are surmising is that there's a scent difference. So for example, I was reading about a dog that could sniff in Asia a bunch of different children's socks and could detect from the smell of their socks the malaria that the child had. So they were actually doing studies on how the chemistry of your body, the odor of your body changes. So I think a lot of it is surmised or thought to be a scent, and then they're trying to create like super detector noses to mechanical robot noses to mimic what the dog is doing, so that you could have a blood sample or some sample sent to you, and you don't have to have a dog detective. You can have a machine that can do many batches all at once. So I think that's one key component, is the change in the body chemistry might change your odor.
Yeah. And for the dogs that are trained specifically for certain indicators, if a dog is trained to indicate, let's say, a change in blood sugar, what they do is they train the dog very carefully. Dogs have such a different sense of smell than we have, thousands of times better. And it's mostly dogs get trained through reinforcement, not very different than you might teach your dog to sit or lie down. what they do is they find the indicator scent, and they train the dog to respond to that particular scent or change, and they reinforce it very much like you reinforce your dog when it does something you're asking it to do, by giving it a reward. Sometimes the reward might be a treat, or for when they're training other dogs like labs, they might give the dog a ball or a toy as a reward. But it's usually very straightforward reinforcement where they reward the dog over and over again for the behavior they want based on the trigger that they're trying to teach it. Leonor.
Yeah, we used to work with someone in the San Mateo Sheriff's County's office who volunteered with a search and rescue dog. And this was a yellow lab, and she was trained exactly the way Julie said. When she got reinforcement, it was a ball that she played with. And in the classroom, he would show us, the volunteer would show us how this happened. And she was trained to use her incredible sense of smell to locate lost people, to locate lost objects. So the sense of smell is very, very important when you're training these dogs.
And
So they very carefully decide, what is it they're wanting the dog to do, and they reinforce that specific scent or that specific action. If they're trying to teach a dog to pull a rope to open a refrigerator door, they teach it very much like you teach your own dog. It's just they specifically teach it for the scent or the actions that they're wanting the dog to perform.
And Izzy, I feel
Very
like your question was maybe a two-part question. Did we answer all that you were asking?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
And anyone else?
I
have a question. So, if you had like one type of dog, and then you like spent a day with the same type, but not the one that you know, would that be different? Like, would you have a different connection than with a different type of dog?
Very good question.
I can only speak from my experience. I think we can each take a stab at this. Every one of us has a very different bond or connection with an individual animal, just like you do with your friends at school. You may like everyone in your class, but you have a special connection with some people more than others for different reasons. And we all have that same response with animals as well. So I might, just like greyhounds in general, but I have a different bond with certain greyhounds based on the way we interact, or the way, the way they behave with me, or the way they respond to me. And I think that's all part of our nature. And it's a good question, because I have to be really careful when I take Kermit anywhere not to assume that everyone, just because he's a friendly, calm dog, is going to relate well and want to be touching him or being around him. So even if they have animals at home, they may not relate the same way to Kermit as they relate to their own animal. So I think it is a very individual connection with each animal, even though it may be the same breed or a dog that has been trained to do the same thing. So for example, I'll just add one more example. When they train leader dogs to help blind people, they often, before they will let people get matched with a dog to take home as their leader dog, they do very careful matching between the human and the dog to look for that bond. Because even though they might have trained 6 dogs in one litter to be leader dogs, that not every dog is going to have the same bond with the person who needs them. So they often do some really careful vetting of introducing the dogs to the people to see which dogs bond best with which people. So that was a really interesting question.
Yeah.
And you guys can add something.
Each animal has, sorry, has its own personality and reacts differently with different people, just like as Julie said, we react differently with different people. And I've had cats and they've each been distinct, even though most of them, well, all of them have been Siamese mixes. And they've reacted differently. Some want to sit in my lap. One who is so attached to me, he rubs against me, but he won't sit in my lap unless I'm in bed. So they just react very, very differently. And what Julie said at the end is very important, that groups that help people, match people with dogs are very, very careful about how they go about doing this. We've worked with Canine Companions for Independence, and they go through a long training period. They supply basically mobility assistance dogs, the kinds who open the refrigerator, help people open doors, retrieve objects, and they go through training periods and trial periods with different people who need these dogs' help. And usually sometimes people ask, what happens to the dog when he gets too old to help? Well, in all the cases that we've seen, they just stay there and become companions to the next dog. And we've had the opportunity, and I hope we'll be able to do that in person in the future, of meeting retired mobility assistance dogs and working dogs who are actually doing their job. And a lot of service dogs have a special vest that indicates that they're a service dog. They've gone through very extensive training. And when we run into a service dog on the street or in a restaurant, when we ever get back there, and in other places, we really shouldn't, even though the dog seems so nice and so friendly. Like, you can go up and pet Kermit, but if you see a dog wearing a vest, it's advised that we don't try to pet them, that we let them concentrate on doing their job. And they're really good at concentrating on doing their job.
And so that was a great question, Natasha. And so they could provide information about the observable things that we can know about how individuals respond to different dogs and different pets, whether it's your own or someone else's. But there's also scientific research that backs it up in a small study with a functional MRI, where the individual is placed into a brain scan machine, MRI, and shown different images. So basically, if a pet owner is shown an image of their dog and then later a picture of their neighbor's dog, so they're familiar with their dog, but they don't have, one would assume, or one would think, the same level of bond. And the functional MRI does show that out. So what lights up when they show the image of their own personal pet is those oxytocin-rich, dopamine-rich areas of the brain that light up when you see your own personal pet that you're connected to, compared to one you're familiar with but not as connected. And that is, they make the extrapolation from human studies where mothers are shown a picture of their baby versus just another baby they know, and looking at the differences in where their brain lights up. And so it's similar for pet owners. So that is, again, physiologically kind of showing the connection that an individual might have with their own personal pet versus other cats or dogs that they just kind of like. That was a nice question. Does anybody else have a question?
Sorry, I don't know if Natasha asked this actually because my Zoom cut out for a bit, but why do different species like bond better with people than others? Like, I know you have to work a lot more to get your cat to bond to you than your dog, because I've had that experience. So why is that?
Very good question.
Yeah.
You know, it goes back thousands of years. Dogs were very motivated. Thousands of years ago, they learned that when they hung around people, they were, dogs evolved from wolves, and early wolf pack dogs, some of them, not all of them, some of them learned that when they hung around people, there were a couple benefits. One, they had some safety from other prey animals. Yeah. And two, they had greater access to food when they were around people without having to hunt. And so dogs, very slowly, a certain portion of the wolves gravitated towards people and other wolves didn't. And there's been a lot of study on the difference between that connection that some wolves made with people and some wolves don't. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. But very gradually, the people also learned that having the wolves around benefited them, because it kept prey animals away from their sheep and other crops. And it also provided besides just some sense of security, I guess. And then dogs gradually became companions. And evidently cats, maybe Leonor can talk differently, cats didn't evolve the same relationship with people. I think, did we tame cats? How did cats
chose to live with us. When people started storing their grain and other crops, and they built structures for them, rats and mice would get in, and other small animals, and cats gravitated to that because they're obligate carnivores, which means that they must have meat in their diet. They began hunting the rats and mice and voles and other small creatures that were devouring the grain. And people began to realize it's good to have cats in there because they are helping us preserve our food. They didn't eat the grain because they're not interested in eating grain. They're interested in eating meat. So that's how cats came to be with us.
Huh.
And I would propose also another theory, and that is, we'll probably talk about this later after our Zoom call about, during the rest of our Girl Scout session, about communication and the ability to communicate and how that relates to connection. So you watch some videos where the dogs were proven to really have more animated facial expressions when the owner was facing them rather than when the owner was facing away. And it didn't matter if food or treats or bribes or what was involved. It was really just the interaction. So leading one to surmise that they are trying to communicate. So that's dogs, and they seem to, they have the musculature and the ability to have expressive eyebrows, and they have the interest to communicate. But I would maintain that for other species, that it may be a problem of on our side, that we can't necessarily recognize as many of the cues. They're not as obvious as in dogs. And so it's our fault that we are not able to communicate as well with them. And so that leads people to say, oh, that cat I can never see it. It's always hiding. When I visit my neighbor, it's a crummy cat. Why do people like cats? Whereas this dog's right here, and it's fun. So I think what they don't understand is that there is this one-on-one bonding and connection that the person has with the cat. And I think that person has made the investment to observe the animal and try and communicate. There's studies that show that cats are more verbal to their owner than they are to one another, right? So they're trying to talk back, but they don't know how. They're trying to communicate. And while they may not have the same musculature and expressiveness in their facial muscles, they certainly communicate through a blink, a calm, a purr, of course, rubbing. And so those, and you have to also know that when they do a tiny flick of the tail, they're not wagging their dog like a tail like a happy dog. They're starting to get irritated, just like a person would say, okay, stop tickling me. I don't like that. They're doing subtle cues, but the person may not stop tickling you until you say, hey, cut it out. And that's, the equivalent of the cat having to say, I told you with my little few tail twitches to stop, and you were grabbing me still, so now I'm going to hiss. So it seems like people have to be willing to read the cues and learn the communication of that individual species. And once they do, you get a much deeper relationship. Anyway, so maybe the connection, if we have a barrier to connection with other species, it may be that we just need to learn to be more communicative and read their body language.
Exactly. I was going to say body language, and body language is very different between cats and dogs. Cats, as we've learned, they flick their tail when they're starting to get annoyed. And if you notice that, you step back. Cats, when they're scared, just like dogs, their tail goes down and goes between their legs. When they're happy, their tail is straight up and usually bent at the top, either toward them or toward the back. If a cat sleeps next to you and turns its back on you, that is ultimate trust, because he knows or she knows that you're safe and he feels safe with you and you won't attack him. So cats are different from dogs.
And then other species, I've been having a lot of fun going to, there's this Dodo website, Soulmates, super wonderful animal videos, but there's so many different humans that connect with different species that they're especially raising as orphans, ducks, squirrels. Again, I think it's more the human kind of exerting an effort to connect, and then they both reap the rewards. You can see cows really snuggling with people too. So that was a nice question. Any other questions?
There are organizations in the area where you can visit and snuggle with different kinds of animals, and they're different kinds of therapy animals. Animal Assisted Happiness, Jasper Ridge Farm. They have programs to help kids who are struggling build a relationship with an animal and move ahead socially and in their personal lives.
Another question?
So I was wondering, how are animals, or like specifically dogs in this case, able to smell like if their owner has an illness, or like if there's a weapon? Because how do they know if it's not like new food or a toy or something?
Rachel, can you be more specific about the dog's sense of smell and how we can reward the distinctions that they perceive?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's so incredibly discerning, but you're right. I think this gets back to screening of the animal. I mean, as a puppy, you may notice a certain proclivity to be able to being distracted by those other things, those other rewards. You may want to work with a trained younger animal when they're already full, for example. And part of the training is definitely focusing on what you want them to learn and cue to. But then as they learn that cue, you introduce the treat and you try and see if it's a distractible animal. So I think a lot of it is in the screening and in the careful rearing of and tailoring the behavior. So they only get the reward when they stay focused on the task that you want them to achieve.
Yeah, it's all in training. You know, Kermit didn't get trained for any scent indicator, but even if you take your dog through standard training and go through what we call good citizenship training, there are certain behaviors that they want to see you have trained your dog to respond to specifically. So, you might have trained them to sit. That's a common one. You might have trained them to sit or stay. And in good citizenship training, they want to make sure that the dog does not break the sit, stay, or lie down if there's food or treats. So they will test that. And then they'll also test how well your dog will stay if you, their person who they're attached to, walks away and they can't see you anymore. Because a lot of our dogs will respond to our commands as long as they see us. But in good citizenship training, they want to make sure your dog will maintain that command even if you walk away and they can't see you. So it's a process of getting them up to higher and higher levels of responding to the behavior you want, testing if that behavior will show up even when there are other distractions like food or you walk away. And if they break that, you either keep training them, or in the case of a dog that's being vetted for a certain indicator or behavior, you might say, well, this dog isn't the best dog for that job. But they get very carefully, repetitively trained and tested until they can determine whether that dog will be able to respond well to that scent or that behavior. And they just keep getting it reinforced until they decide if that dog can do it, or maybe that dog needs to be a pet. A lot of dogs, we call it failing, but it's not really failing. A lot of dogs don't get through their training successfully for that job. And what they do is then they become a really wonderful pet for a family.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to train a lot of dogs to find those few that can do the job really well.
And especially for dogs who go out in the community, accompanying people, like mobility assistance dogs, like leader dogs, they can't be stressed out or distracted by anything in the environment. So they will train bringing other dogs in and see if they will still continue to do their job, bringing a cat in, taking them out where there's squirrels running around, just to make certain that they are really qualified to do the job.
Well, I think we've had each scout raise one question. If there aren't any other pressing questions, just because I want to be mindful of time, maybe we'll move on a little bit. Just want to make sure there aren't any other urgent questions. Christy?
No, looks good.
Okay. All right. Well, so I just wanted to mention, so we're talking all about the human-animal bond and the depths of it and what it means and what are the benefits. And so we've touched a lot on some of the really great objective measurements with, as she mentioned, really, Dr. Forbes mentioned, with decreasing your heart rate, decreasing your stress hormones. And then we watched one video where there was a veterinarian who suggested that there may be studies trying to prove that it's happening in the animal as well, that they're getting the oxytocin love binding hormone too. So it's benefiting both of us. So those are the objective things. And then we've talked about as a scientist, you think of, is it a subjective experiment or objective experiment? And the subjective measurements of like, oh, we notice that the person seems happier, or they report that they feel more connected to the world as a whole. If they have a dog, if they're having trouble with interpersonal relationships, that they can feel happier because they have that connection. So just trying to think of other ways that they're helping through the human-animal bond. Animals certainly getting you out to exercise your dog oftentimes means that you meet other dog owners, and so you have more interpersonal positive interactions. Certainly we talked about comforting with after a stressful or a post-traumatic PTSD event. They can try and reduce the severity or distract away from some of the feelings. And you don't have to be, diagnosed. I was reading studies, with people diagnosed with clinical depression. You don't have to have that diagnosis to benefit. Certainly if you're having a bad day, you've had a bad fight with your mom, and you just go and snuggle your cat and you feel better. So there's these more other tangible physical and emotional benefits that happen from that bond that you have. So yes, and just talking then briefly about, from the perspective of the veterinarian, the positive aspects that I observed in the clinic of the bond, I can definitely see how well loved the animal is. The owner tells me, they give me a purpose for getting up in the morning and being active, and in an otherwise dreary day, they get me outside, which is also proven to help people's emotional health. And you can see in the room, especially when the dog is just like staring at the owner and doesn't really want to look at me, just hoping like if I tell her we need to leave, maybe I can ignore that woman in the white coat over there. We can get out of here. You know, so you see them trying to communicate, or the cat that's clinging to the owner as you try to take it back for like a blood draw. You see that they are connected. And how they reciprocate it. And many people would always tell me, you know, my dog or my cat is like my child. And so you really understand the depth of that bond. And as a consequence, a positive consequence of that human-animal bond, you see that the animal gets not only a wonderful, loving life with the owner, the pet parent, but also that they tend to get good quality health care too. So their physical health benefits as well. And maybe this wouldn't necessarily occur to you, but I just wanted to touch on maybe the negative aspects of the deep human-animal bond that some people have. It was often very, very hard as a veterinarian to have to learn that someone could not do what they really wanted to do to medically help their cat because they couldn't financially afford it. And so you knew either they were going to go into debt for years or decades to do what was recommended or suggested as a possibility, or they couldn't do it. And to see that distress is incredibly hard as a veterinarian. So many vets notice and feel that. And I was just really glad Leonor brought up the fact that there are organizations that can help financially. And on the Palo Alto Humane Society website, I noticed that they have links to different organizations that can help with veterinary care. The other flip side of this strong bond is how devastated owners, pet parents are when it's time for the animal to pass away, since they have a shorter lifespan typically than we do. So, you know, the distress they feel is really hard. And a lot of us have been there with our own pets. We know that it's incredibly hard. And it's interesting, I think maybe some people don't realize when they say to me as a veterinarian, it must be so hard to perform a euthanasia. And I think it's hard for reasons that are different than they might think. So I see before me an animal that is suffering, that has no other options, and I am compelled through compassion to try and ease their suffering by helping their transition. So that part is, maybe it's a surprise to know that that part is less hard for me, because I really just, my emotional desire is to ease the suffering. And importantly, I have an affection for the animal, but not that bond that the owner has. I know from personal experience how very different it is when I have to euthanize my own pet than others. The really hard part of a euthanasia for this veterinarian is again, seeing the distress of the owner and knowing how hard it will be until they feel ready, if they've had enough time, until they feel ready to get another pet, that this is going to impact them pretty profoundly. And what's nice, in the past couple of decades, we've become more aware and want to really help people. So a lot of veterinarians, you should reach out to them, or they will hopefully talk to you about pet support, pet loss support groups, so that people can help in that difficult time. That I do try to convey to the owner when I see their distress, that this tells me how well loved the animal was during their life, and how incredibly lucky that animal was to have such a deep bond with someone who loves them that much. And so the depth of their grief correlates to the depth of their love, and how lucky that animal was to receive that. So I think that is, I mean, we talk so much about the emotional benefits that are observed. I mean, reading different studies as I mentioned, animals provide simple relationships free from conflict that you might have in interpersonal ones. There's unconditional positive regard. They're always happy to see you. They don't think you're a bad person. They help you cope with life events. If you live alone, they're, again, contact. Anyway, I think I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions about this from the veterinary perspective of the human-animal bond. And it's okay if you don't. I primarily asked you to prepare for a psychologist, Dr. Forbes.
Yeah, it looks like we're good right now.
All right, Maureen, I saw your mute come off. Did you have anything?
Oh yes. So okay, this is weird. So Rachel, sorry, she's my mom, so like
Yes.
it's kind of strange. So you actually quit, because you could not stand seeing, people not have funding, and so I was wondering, how can like people donate to those organizations that help people?
Good question.
Find
Yeah, I would say that is one of the reasons. It wasn't the only reason, but it was just such an emotional drain to, and people cannot do their jobs for free, and so we would have to ask for payment. So that was just really hard, and I didn't really want to do it. Didn't want to ask for thousands of dollars that people didn't have when I know that was driving them into debt. But I know, Leonor, you have the Daisies Fund.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you want to speak to that.
We're going to have an online event. Since I do education, I'm not as involved with that event, but Rachel, you can contact Sue Clapholz, who you know, and Carol Hyde, and they will fill you in on donations to the Daisy Fund. You can also donate to us by mail, check, through some of our Facebook fund campaigns, or just by writing to me. And Christy has my email, and so do you, Rachel. Mm-hmm. And indicating your interest in making a donation to the Daisy Fund or to any of our funds that help animals. And if you know of cases of people who need help, would you just refer them to us and we would evaluate the cases? So, and we do that every day. So, yeah.
And Sue Clapholz, who you mentioned, she created this Daisies Fund in memory of her dog, and it's specifically to help with veterinary care with people who struggle to financially do it. And so if you Google Palo Alto Humane Society and Daisy Fund, it'll send you to a page where you can contribute to the Daisy Fund yourself too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to thank you two so much for coming and talking, and Kermit, you three. I think we all learned so much about the importance and the strength and the reasons why we have this bond and the beneficial effects emotionally and physically. And just, I'm very grateful that you joined us. So thank you, joined our troop.
Yes, thank you so much. We look forward to working with you guys when we're all open.
Yeah, and you can work with us again with another kind of Zoom activity. We also have lots of videos on our website, so if you want to see more videos, I told you, Rachel, about a video about training service dogs that you might be interested in seeing. So please feel free to contact us. That is a good one. Yeah.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And it was great seeing Kermit again in a kind of live context. Yeah. Okay.